Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 2 of Some Patches Required, where we attempt to educate and hopefully entertain you all on the ever-turbulent games industry. It's been a while, but my name is Zach, and I'm one of your hosts.
And I am your other host. My name has always been, and still remains, Aaron.
And this is the first episode of Season 2. So if you've made it this far, or this is your first time, we want to say thank you to all of our fans. I know that it's been, I think, by the time this comes out, like 3 months. So hopefully we're 3 months smarter. Can't make any promises, but we appreciate you all. And please give us a like, share, whatever, cheeky thing you can do on social media. Your support is amazing, and we appreciate you.
Yeah. Hit us up on TripAdvisor, Yelp, anything like that. Honestly, it's all very helpful. But seriously, just to kind of piggyback off of what Zach said, I genuinely do appreciate everyone who has listened to show up to this point. We took some time away to reevaluate, hopefully make it a little bit better for you, hopefully bring some more people in, and we're happy to be back, but we're going to try and shake the rust off in this one with kind of it's not necessarily an easy topic, but not a particularly hard one.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say that there will be spoilers in this episode. So if you care about spoilers for Pokemon, specifically Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, you have been warned. And there are also probably going to be quite a bit of hot takes when it comes to Pokemon. I don't think they're particularly hot or spicy takes, but I do know that the Pokemon community is very passionate, and let's just say we will not only be spewing love in Pokemon's direction. So
yeah,
you've been warned.
I will start those off by saying that nothing in Pokemon has been particularly hot or spicy for a very good long time.
It hasn't really brought that heat to the bedroom in quite a long time.
Except
right?
for the times where you could make spicy dishes for your Pokemon.
Yeah, now you just make sandwiches. It's kind of lukewarm.
I'll be honest with you, I still don't even actually know how to make sandwiches.
Well, you're not missing out on much.
I've only played 25 hours of the game.
Well, I guess jumping into it, we'll just talk about our general thoughts before getting into some of the other topics here. But Aaron,
spoiler alert, we are talking about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, general takes on the game, as well as some of the larger macro level things that the game kind of says about the industry. And it is a lot. Like, to say that this is a layup of a topic, an easy way to start a new season is completely wrong, because it does say a lot about a lot of things. But first, we are going to start off with our general takes. Zachary, would you mind starting, please?
Oh, well, I mean, only other thing I would add on to what you're saying is specifically how a game can come out and be so unpolished and technically problematic and yet sell so well. So, but for my take, without alluding too much, I had fun with the game. I finished the game in pretty typical fashion. After I finished the story of the game, I had aspirations of being competitive in Pokemon, found it incredibly complicated to enter that scene, and then kind of got bored of the game, which is literally what I think happens every single new entry into the franchise that's got new Pokemon in it. That happens to me every single time. I don't know why. I followed the same course of action. And I think my only other comments would be, I appreciated some of the new features. There are definitely some things that are innovative, but for the most part, it is more Pokemon. We had an episode earlier last season where I had some comments about thinking the game kind of looked ugly. I stand by that. I think that a lot of the textures are pretty bland. I think a lot of the animations are pretty bland. And I think that a lot of the environments are very uninspired. So there's a lot of negatives in there. I still had fun. All of that being said, I enjoyed the game. But that's kind of my quick TLDR, if you will. I'll have a lot more to say as we go on here, but so I don't bloviate, Aaron, what are your initial thoughts? What's your intro?
Okay, so in order to avoid bloviating, you've asked the professional bloviator.
Something like that.
To take over. Yeah, okay. So my TLDR is that I have not so enthusiastically played a Pokemon game since actually the time in college where I got a lot of wings over with a bunch of friends and went to the midnight release for, I want to say, Sun and Moon. And in that situation, it was the social aspect. But outside of that, the game itself is fine. Well, that's actually a misrepresentation of... well, it's actually a semantic issue. It's more an issue of when you say, is a game good or is a game functional? Because it's technically both, but it's also a shining example of a game that was released 4 to 6 months too early. It has no business being on shelves. Oh, and maybe by this point, if it was released yesterday, it would. But overall, it's fine. It's got some good stuff. But I think the problem itself might ultimately actually be the Pokemon formula. To some degree, and so I'm playing it, but the best way I could describe it, again, the professional bloviator, the way I described it was when you drive one particular route very frequently, maybe every single day. You're going to college, you go back home, you go back to school, you're living away, you go visit family, you learn the route. You drive to work every single day.
Yeah.
Do you ever remember that drive? No, you just go on autopilot. And I've now played like 30 hours, which I know I'm about halfway through the main storyline. I've only got one more gym to beat before I hit the final four, or the Elite Four rather.
Yeah.
And I've got one more legendary monster to get the Mystica. Herba Mystica?
Yeah, it's that.
Which sounds suspiciously like a strain of weed. And then like 2 more Team Star bosses to get through before I get through all of those storylines. But the moments that punctuate, like the moments that I remember that punctuate the story, that punctuate each individual storyline, are the only real things that I remember. I remember, I didn't get that Pokemon, but for the rest of it, I remember like an hour and a half of this game.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a situation where the game is probably going to be pretty forgetful outside of the fact that it was really them. I mean, I almost said it was the first game that was 3D, but it's not, because that was Sword and Shield, and other games were technically 3D, but you know what I mean, like really tried to adopt like a modern approach to games. I just
I've got so many thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, TLDR of it too is like there's a lot of cool things they tried to push in. Like I know you had mentioned to me when we were prepping for this that you really like the lack of random encounters and the lack of trainers coming up and mugging you to fight them. Yes. I agree. I think that's great. I don't really like those aspects. I spent half of the old games trying to not be in combat as much as possible, so it not forcing me to do that was pretty cool. And I think it helps you buy into the world a little bit more. But
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, but then we also commented to each other that like it's still a linear game. There's still a very real route that it wants you to take. So it's like not even really an open world game, even though that's exactly what it's supposed to be. And also, you didn't play Sword and Shield, but the one thing that honestly really bugged me the most is, oh, did you? Oh, sorry. So in Sword and Shield, you've got really good character customization for your character. Like, pretty superior, honestly. You can make your character look like how you want. In Scarlet and Violet, you can't do that. They literally strip that away from you with the exception of, like, hats, gloves, and shoes. You have to wear, like, a set of, like, 3 different uniforms. And it's just, I thought that was incredibly lame, I'm going to be honest. But
oh, no, it is good. It's something that I kept looking for, actually, because I was used to Sword, which I bought. I was looking for that the entire time. I was like, how can I change my shirt outside of these 4 ones that I have?
Yeah.
I kept looking for stores. I was shopping in a game. I was shopping for a place to shop.
Yeah, and there's just nothing. I mean, it felt like a missing feature because it was so much better implemented in the first one as compared to this one. And I just I think that's incredibly bizarre. And then in addition to that, so I don't think either of us played Arceus, but I've heard consistently that there's certain features from Arceus that are missing from this game. So like one thing I know in Arceus that you can do is like catch Pokemon in the wild just with like a random Pokeball. You can't do that at all in this game. Like you have to fight in order to get or catch a Pokemon. Arceus, it wasn't that way. You could kind of circumvent that, and I think that's kind of neat. But then they didn't decide to put it into this game, so it's kind of an interesting backtrack from, it seems like, features that people actually really liked from a game that released before this latest entry into the Pokemon franchise.
Yeah. I would say, there are so many things about this game that, like, again, like I said, I am actually, and to some degree, this is a random side tangent, and I will keep it very brief. Says the professional bloviator. Hey, we're season 2 and I'm still talking like this. How about that? I saw Avatar 2 and I liked it. It was a good movie. It was technically magnificent about 93% of the time. But same as the first one, the story shot straight down the middle. And the worst thing you can do in a game is be average. Right? So, I like this game. And I liked Avatar 2. And my brain being the way it is, I like to complain about things I like more than things that I hate. And I'm like, this game and the entire Pokemon franchise just shoots straight down the middle. And this game indicates something to me where, like, Arceus was a diversion for the series, right? And I didn't play it, so I can't speak to its efficacy as a game. I can't speak to its competency as a game. But I can say that it at least tried to do something different. And this game's biggest problem is that it just shoots straight down the middle. The battling system, yeah, you can move the camera, and that's something. Whatever. The throwing of the Pokeballs is a little bit more streamlined. You don't have to go all the way into your bag and pick it out and then throw the one that you want, and it's whatever. But it just shoots straight down the middle, and nothing else has changed about much of the experience. That's my biggest problem with the game.
Well, I think it's like, so one of my favorite Pokemon games, and I think it's because I took a massive break from like Ruby and Sapphire and then started up with like X and Y. But I thought X and Y was a pretty solid game. I
never played those.
I like it. I think the side characters in X and Y are really strong too. I think there's much more of a feeling of like friendship, which they always want in the games. But like, yeah. I think in this game, the side characters were pretty weak. I think, talking about shooting straight down the middle, they really advertised having 3 different quest lines that you could follow through with. And I think they ultimately end up being some version of a gym battle functionally. And it's just like more of the same, really.
Yes.
And the narratives are pretty weak, if I'm being honest. Actually, the narrative gets strong at the end. I know you haven't beaten it. So like, it's funny because the game's narrative gets really strong as you're beating the game. And then you're just sitting there and you're like, why couldn't that have been the narrative that this game had from the beginning?
The only narrative moment that I really was like interested in was when I figured out that Dr. Flophair. Well, no, okay, so there are two narrative moments that I was interested in. One is frivolous, one is serious. The frivolous one is when, spoilers, the main guy, the director of the Pokemon Academy where you're going, puts on a fake-ass pompadour and tries to help you take down the bad people. I thought that was adorable, and I loved it.
Yeah, that was funny.
That was great. And then the serious one was when you found out that the guy who was kind of a dick at the beginning just wanted to take care of his dog. And that's why you're fighting all these legendary Pokemon. I like both of those elements.
Mm-hmm.
My bigger problem, I have two big problems, and I will enumerate them now and then shut up until we move to the next topic. The first big problem is that the open world is completely broken. The scaling system just doesn't work. I had a friend many years ago reference Assassin's Creed Odyssey and say, why are they calling this an open world game when everything is so hardly and specifically level gated? If you go to any of the islands where you're supposed to have a level of 101 and you're at level 5, you ain't going to be able to beat it. It's just not going to happen. It just doesn't work like that. The game isn't built that way. You're going to get hit unless you have enough skill, and this is an important point. Unless you have enough skill, you're not going to be able to get there. It's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And this game works the exact same way as that, but it's also trying to emulate Breath of the Wild. In the sense that, oh, there's this big, beautiful open world. There's flowing grass that, just kind of dances in the breeze. And there's delicate music playing in the background. And there's critters running around. And you can either choose to fight them or choose to avoid them. Except for the fact that it's a JRPG that is even more specifically hard level gated than Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Yeah.
So the progression of the game is just it's aesthetic. The progression is presentation, not actual freedom, and that's broken. And then number 2, and then again, like I said, I will shut up. I have to bring up the fact that Pokemon Coliseum is the best Pokemon game.
It's a good game.
Because it, and I know I've brought up this exact point, so I will keep it mercifully brief. But if you want to make an innovative Pokemon game, the first thing any employee at Game Freak should do is look at Pokemon Coliseum, a game that they made. Because what they did was they took an established formula and they changed 3 elements? Maybe? Yeah, 3 elements. And revolutionized the game. You took the strong design, you took the nice characters, you took the interesting world, you put it somewhere weird, cool, new environment. You're not going around a whole region, you're moving between different spots. You can't catch wild Pokemon. That's a huge one. You have to take them from other trainers. And there are only specific Pokemon that you can take from those trainers. And then when you get those Pokemon, you have to train them out of having... Because in that game, they had their hearts closed off.
Mm-hmm.
And you needed to train them out of that. So that kind of made up for the like, oh, if you're don't have this many gym badges, you can't, teach Pokemon up to like level 45 or whatever like that. In this one, it's, they'll rebel against you until you cleanse their hearts of the evilness that was in there, that was implanted by the bad team. And then that has impact on the fact that you now have to cycle through your entire team. You're not filling up 45 boxes and trying to max out your Pokedex. which is, in my opinion, and I'm sorry, email us. The most boring part of every Pokemon game is trying to fill out the Pokedex. It's annoying.
Well, it's like collectibles.
It's boring.
Like, I'm not a person that likes collectibles, like, just for the sake of having them. And I think what you're really hitting on is that Pokemon Coliseum, I haven't played XD Gale of Darkness, but I'm assuming it's a similar thing of, like, they're much more in the traditional JRPG space where it's like, you have these characters and you use these select... Well, I mean, but it is in the sense of, like, it's like Mass Effect. You don't have a massive... Like, what if in Mass Effect you could collect people and that was, like, your team? Like...
Yeah.
It's
in essence, you do, but it's more like, what if you took the collectible format and said, instead of 340 of them, you collected 32, and then you needed to work with each one to get them healthy. In Mass Effect, it's completely different because you want to earn their trust.
They're different. But more what I mean with the Mass Effect example is it's the equivalent of expecting to have some kind of, like, specific tie to a character when there's, like, 70 of them that you can choose from.
Yeah.
It's like in Metal Gear Solid,
different.
You don't care about the people you recruit because you recruit, like, I don't even know if there's a limit to how many of the people you can randomly put that balloon on.
I think it's only to the limit that it's upgradable for, like, lodging, especially in, like, MGS 5 or something like that. But
I definitely see what you're... I mean, I agree with you.
but it doesn't just change the overall experience. It changes the way that you approach every battle, because the other thing that they changed is that every battle was a double battle. And because the only opportunities you had to catch Pokemon were during battles with other trainers, when the other trainer would have another Pokemon on the field, you had to strategize. And it completely flipped the formula. And I'm saying that's innovative. That's creative. That completely flips the entire Pokemon formula that has been going since the very first one on its head. Those rules go out the window, but all you really did was change 3 rules.
Yeah.
This game and no other game since Gale of Darkness, which came out right after Coliseum, none of the other ones have done that. The aesthetic thing, like, you know what? I can get over it. I can find a nice beanie for my character. He'll keep wearing his school coat. I can give that one a free pass. That's fine. The lack of actual innovation, especially in light of the technical issues that plague this game and actually make me sound like an asshole when I describe them, that's what frustrates me.
Yeah. Well, to get to that point, and push forward, not to divert from what you're talking about with Pokemon Coliseum, because I think that is a valid conversation. I think it'll come up as we continue here too, but this game is just absolutely plagued with horrible Tim Burtonitis, as I would call it. And I call it Tim Burtonitis because everything looks like a stop motion scene. There's a scene at the beginning of the game I was talking to Aaron about where you're in a classroom and all the kids are like kicking and swinging their legs, and it looks like a stop motion film, and it almost kind of looks like a horror film because of how discomforting it is. And it's like they're like horrible pop in when anything's at a super far away distance from you. Like, Aaron, I don't know if you noticed the windmills in the one town.
They're not. They wouldn't blow it. There's no wind in this world.
Yeah,
unless the wind is being blown by a different fan.
It's like Schrodinger's wind. Until you're like in front of the windmill, the wind doesn't exist to blow the windmill. It's bad. And it's especially kind of weird because this was the only platform that this game was for. It was the Switch. They had a single platform to develop this game for, and they didn't even do a good job with it from a technical perspective.
I can't stress this enough, because I actually mentioned the technical thing because I wanted to talk about this specific aspect of it. I am not a frame rate chaser. I'm not the sort of person who gets like, oh man, I can't get 4K and 60 FPS. Well, fuck this game. This game runs like shit on a system that it was designed for, and I can play Doom from 2016, a Twitch shooter, on this game without a frame rate drop. I can play it on this system. It's not an issue. This game, where the graphics look like you could have pulled them from the Wii or the Wii U, runs like absolute dump. It's the only time that this has ever actually bothered me in a game where it wasn't system breaking. It is an aesthetic issue, but
I think it interrupts the art style is why it's so offensive.
Well, but the thing is, the art style it's cute enough. You know, it's cute enough to get by. But when honestly, what I think it is one of the innovations they made, the only real like experiential things that they changed, which is also aesthetic, is like, okay, so you run into a Pokemon. You have to actually run into a Pokemon in order to battle it, unless you're using the auto battle system, which is a good way of getting around a broken mechanic, but it's also repetitive and boring. But you see the Pokemon in real time, in a real space, and then you run into them because you either want to fight them or you want to catch them. That is everything I ever wanted from Pokemon when I was a kid. That's all I wanted. I didn't want to wander through the tall grass and wait to see which one I would run into. I wanted to see them. I wanted to be in the world with them. When I was a kid, I used to take one of the dogs out, and I'd have a tennis ball in my hand and hold the tennis ball like it was a Pokemon, or a Pokeball, rather. Sorry. And be like, go, Kennedy. And that was like really fun for me to imagine as a kid. And now I'm playing this game as a rapidly aging 27-year-old. And I'm still playing as a kid in the game. And they've given me that. But now I'm imagining what it would look like if I was a child. And in the background, in real life, a car was just moving at like 1 frame per second down the street. and like my vision, as soon as I threw the tennis ball, like flipped underneath my dog. Because that's exactly what happens in this game. And I'm like, how could you have flubbed this so badly? You have a fucking crazy Twitch shooter that can run flawlessly on this system. The Witcher 3 runs on this system.
Yeah, and it's like, obviously they had to take some, sacrifices for those games when it comes to graphical fidelity, but they like still look pretty good. And then you've got Pokemon, which looks way worse and just cannot run. And the interesting thing is, and I feel so bad because you have so many good points here, Aaron, that I want to dig into more, but I have to be the timer police. It's like this game did so well, but runs so badly. Like 18 million plus copies of this game sold. And that's ridiculous. Like absolutely freaking ridiculous that this game had 18 plus million copies sold. And I will say, like, I don't know if you've looked at any of the reviews, Aaron, for the game directly, but like reviewers were pretty much every outlet was saying like there are massive performance issues with this game, and that is not okay. So at least some people were calling it out. But I remember, and this kind of turns into our second topic in some ways, that a lot of people were still being very positive on this game, even though there were all of these technical issues that I think are ultimately kind of unforgivable in a finalized product. Like, I don't think that you can have these frame rate issues, really, that's the biggest thing, is the frame rate issues. Like, to the point of massive stuttering and just like massive pop-in, performance issues, blah, 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 blah. Like, how can you say a product is finished when it's performing so badly? And yet it still sells 18 million copies. Like,
yeah, anywhere between 18 and 20 million. It's absolutely bonkers. And it it's galling in that sense. And again, I don't have any problems with you cutting me off there, because honestly, if you let me go, this would turn into a podcast that I've considered launching, which would be a solo venture called I Have Some Grievances. And it would basically just be me complaining for about 5 minutes a couple times a week. But I don't know how you can get away with releasing a game this fundamentally unfinished. And if I'm being completely honest, it actually reminds me of the Cyberpunk situation, where that game it was just, except actually, in fairness to Nintendo, a company that I will share my opinions on more fully here later on, Cyberpunk was much more broken than this game. It was like fundamentally fucked. This game is enjoyable. It is playable, but why? What is going on? Why are games getting released in this state? And that's another thing that we wanted to talk about, was why do games get released unfinished? Especially when they come from large publishers. Again, it would be a completely different thing if it was coming from the single person who made Stardew Valley. But we're talking about Game Freak. We're talking about CD Projekt Red. We're not talking about, Dr. Bagel's homebrew game studio. We're talking about someone who has the capital to fund a studio through a delay.
Well, I think the other interesting comment here is, like, with CD Projekt Red, I will agree with you. The state of Cyberpunk was not merely just like visual glitches and issues. There were also plenty of technical glitches as well. But why can a company like CDPR, how come they can get lambasted and their reputation can be completely slaughtered, and then Pokemon can release something that's such an unfinished product and it not receive the same level of backlash? That's the other kind of important thing, I think, to look at moving into this next section. And I think I'll just cut it off with an interesting thing, or start it off with an interesting thing that we saw on a video from Bellular, which was, he was actually talking about the reality of whether a Pokemon game can even get, pushed back, and brought up the interesting point of, like, it may not even be possible for a Pokemon game to get pushed back because it is part of such a massive merchandising like platform empire that just brings in so much money, and that if a Pokemon game gets pushed back, specifically a mainline, then they have to push back the trading cards, they have to push back the anime tie-in show, they have to push back the toy line. If any of those things get delayed for any reason, tons of money is lost. And so really the mainline Pokemon games, they don't really function in the same way that I feel like a CDPR Cyberpunk game works, where they can keep delaying until the game's perfect. They're part of this massive machine for generating money. And I just thought that was interesting because I never really thought about it in that way. But Pokemon, at least mainline games, are kind of in a weird spot where they can't be delayed.
Yeah.
At least in a capitalist sense, right? I mean, they should be delayed.
I mean, it makes sense if you are the one, and we've both read a fair amount of literature, some of which we may record an episode on before too long. We've talked about the need for capital, even if you are well funded. It costs a lot to make a game. That's fully understood. But there's I think I've come up with a solution for Pokemon.
Keep it from being part of a massive platform of selling different things like toys, trading cards, and anime. That's the solution.
Yes. No, I mean, get away from. I mean, don't get away from that, because I had Pokemon plushies. Me and my brother, well, not me and my brother. My brother used to make me My brother, who you may have actually heard on the show before, Daniel Demana of the GNP Project. You can find him everywhere. And he used to make me like little toys out of styrofoam balls that we buy at Michael's craft store. You know, so everyone wants Pokemon toys, right? So here's my solution. And this actually ties in, I promise. What was another annualized franchise? What was one of the businesses, the companies, the studios that built their business, at least originally, around every single year you release a game? The two that come to my mind are Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, right? And Ubisoft also made Far Cry. Now, Far Cry, the only interesting thing Far Cry has done since the original release of Far Cry 3 was that they will release spin-off games that are not designed to sell as well as their mainline counterparts. Even a little bit. Look at Blood Dragon. Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon was like Snake Plissken jumped into an arcade machine. It was incredibly fun. It was stupid. It wasn't incredible, but it was interesting. What just every other year. Assassin's Creed stopped doing every single year releases. Granted, now we've already recorded some stuff about this, but they've done 150,000 games that they've already announced. Who knows how many of them will come out? Ubisoft is not in a great spot, but look at that model. Think, what if every year a Pokemon game came out? Maybe they don't all sell incredibly well. Maybe some of them are a little bit more in the vein of Colosseum or XD Gale of Darkness. Maybe the big releases are in the vein of Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet, X and Y, Emerald and Ruby and Sapphire, but there's a way to make a profitable formula where you don't have the constant need to tie it in. The designs hold. Start marketing the mainline Pokemon for the next big game way earlier. A year and a half, 2 years earlier. But at least finish the game. There's a way to still function in a capitalist society while making good games and interesting games and different games. And the most galling thing to me is that I keep saying galling. It's a good word, but it's now become very repetitive. I will attempt for the rest of the episode not to use that word. But fucking just spread it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think from their perspective, they view that as a capital loss because if they could come out with a new mainline game every year, I'm sure they would do it. Obviously, from a scalability perspective, that doesn't work, but I don't see a world, unfortunately. I don't disagree. Like, I think the thing that they need is more time between these large releases to make sure that the game is done. I think it's honestly like the biggest thing they could do to support the games being better is make the game the headline. If the game is the headline product and everything else is like ancillary to that, it's a la carte, it's in support of the game, then everything else basically can follow the game more. And I just don't know that that's how they have Pokemon built out as a series right now. And the other point I think that's important that I know that you agree with because you talked about it before, but is that, the community is not exactly demanding more from a Pokemon game. And I think it brings up the interesting point of like, you and I said that the game was fun. And so if the game is fun, then why are we here having any of this conversation? Does the game really need to change if people are having fun with it? Is it wrong for people to enjoy and purchase the game? And my opinion on that is like, no, it's not wrong for you to be a Pokemon enjoyer and enjoy the really, standard formula that they've been following forever. I personally want more, changes and adaptations and things to be different for the game. But the reality is none of that is going to happen if people continue to buy a game like this and it's as technically broken as it is. And I do think that it is irresponsible of Game Freak, Nintendo, everybody involved to release a game in the state that this one is. Yeah, because it just fundamentally is not work. It doesn't work. And the idea that you can patch it after launch is true probably, but it's not the way that it should be. And I think that that's the thing that, we're really trying to draw some attention to is like the onus of responsibility should be on a corporation. But the reality is that in capitalism, people are what drive some of this behavior. And if people are spending money on a Pokemon game, they're not going to change until people stop spending money on a Pokemon game. And we just haven't really seen that happen with any of the mainline ones.
And just to be 100% clear, neither of us are exempting ourselves from this situation because both of us spent money on this particular Pokemon game. I bought Scarlet, he bought Violet. We both paid into the situation. We both thought it was fun. And it's even weird that we're talking about this one because, again, it is a functional game. It's not bad. The problem is there's no reason for it to be what it is. There's just absolutely no reason for it. And that's actually where, and again, I will show some of my bias here. That's where I think some of the value in reviews comes from. That's where the value in journalism and reporting comes from, is informing people, like, unless you're about to have a chicken wing party with 10 of your very good friends, maybe don't buy this game at launch, because the social aspect of playing it will probably still be the same in 6 months when the developers and the publishers and whatnot, well, rather when the publisher has decided to give the developers enough time to fix it and enough money to fix it. But otherwise, Zach, you're completely right. The onus is on us to stop doing it. So the fandom itself being so ravenous for the toys, for the anime, for the games, that the onus is on us to exercise a little bit of self-control every now and again and just say, like, maybe I can deal with it, but should I continue to deal with it for the next, 30 to 40 years of my life while Game Freak continues to release the same Pokemon game over and over again?
Yeah. Well, and I think that, honestly, my experience with this game, and I think I shared this with you, Aaron, but I feel like it's particularly telling to what you just said, which is, like, I bought the game pre-order. I bought the game pre-order because I got into the hype of, like, everybody being really excited about Pokemon, and I was like, oh, man, like, I have fun with them. They're kind of the same, but, like, I have fun with them, whatever. I remember the night that it was coming out, I saw some early reviews, and they were all talking about the technical issues with the game and how it, like, barely ran on the Switch. And I was like, oh my God, fuck. I should get a refund. This kind of ties into some of the Nintendo stuff that we'll get to, but, like, it is not easy to get refunds from Nintendo, if at all possible, right? And so I kind of just played myself, is honestly what I did. And it honestly just illustrates, like, you should not pre-order games until they come out in reality, because there is no guarantee with quality. Even with someone like, I feel like most Pokemon games have typically run technically well. Like, have they been visually superior and all these other things? Like, maybe not, but they typically haven't had these massive issues that, like, this game has from a performance perspective. So it just goes to show, like, things can change on a dime. BioWare used to make some of the best games out there, and then, they
Then they released Anthem.
Had some issues. Well, yeah, and Andromeda, which a lot of people had issues with. But it's like, it's exactly what you're talking about. Of, like, one, I bought into the kind of the fever, the Pokemon fandom fever, and then I pre-ordered it, and then kind of the last tie-in is with some of what you're saying. And I actually will put this part on the community, but I think the Pokemon community is a little bit I don't know the right way to put it. They can be a little ravenous in the sense of like, I offered up some criticism to the game to try and save other people from pre-ordering it, and I was met with hostility because I suggested that people should wait until the game came out before they bought it, basically, so that they could read reviews and see gameplay and all of that. People that I know that I'm friends with got mad at me and had some verbal, words from, nothing like super hurtful, but my point being that people got antagonistic at me for even suggesting that a Pokemon game could be less than stellar. And I do think that's the community's fault. And I do think that feeds into this capitalist thing that we're talking about, because the fandom is almost like uncompromisingly apologetic for Game Freak. And I think that is not great.
Yeah, no. And it does also illustrate the dichotomy between what happened with these two games, Scarlet and Violet, and CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk. It I don't know, it's a constantly fluctuating situation where you just need to be able to make your own decisions. I again, unless you are a collector or just extremely enthusiastic about certain things, or even if you are extremely enthusiastic, maybe just don't pre-order games anymore unless there's something in the reward package for pre-ordering it. Don't pre-order games until reviews come out. There's a reason reviews exist, and it's not just to steer you away from bad products, although that is an extremely functional version, like an extremely good reason to read a review. But everything's opinion based in a review. But I'm also sitting here now about 2.5 feet away from my The Last of Us Part 2 designed PS4 controller, which I bought when I pre-ordered the game, and I played the whole game on it. Like, I did that too, and I'm not a collector, but it's the community around certain things can become, the word toxic, I think, is now overused. I don't think it's inaccurate, but I think it's overused. But communities around certain fandoms, especially ones where people have really strong attachments to properties, things like Pokemon, things like The Little Mermaid, fandoms can become toxic in one direction or another. And whether you like something or dislike something can suddenly become a defining part of your personality or your relevance in any given community. So I think just the biggest thing there is to watch how intensely you're defending or promoting anything, and try and really like dig down and take a second and really evaluate before you give Zach shit about saying the frame rate in this game is busted. It was made for one system and it can only run at 4 frames per second about half the time. And when they eat sandwiches, it looks like they're eating air.
Yeah.
And it's running at 2 frames per second. It's
the more we're talking about this too, what I'm realizing is I'm like ebb and flowing on my opinion with like kind of like the Pokemon community of being like, well, maybe they're just really like other fandoms. And then also being like, no, they're a little bit more on like the overly into it to the point of being apologetic side. And I think I'm leaning on the overly apologetic side for Game Freak now, because I was while you were talking, what was going through my mind is like, what are some other games that come out pretty consistently, but people aren't just fully devoted to every single one? I think you mentioned some of them earlier, actually. I think, like Call of Duty is a franchise where some people will say like, oh, these Call of Duties are good, but these ones suck. Another one is like Final Fantasy. Not every Final Fantasy game is received well. And people are willing to still like attribute a big portion of their, basically there's I guess what still kind of confuses me with Pokemon is it's like, I don't really understand why people don't demand more from the developer, because I feel like people constantly demand more from like a Call of Duty game even, or like a Final Fantasy game. Like people will constantly criticize those games to, make them try and be better. I feel like with Pokemon, it's not the same.
I would slightly disagree. Because I will take, and this is one thing that I wanted to bring up that I will no longer make anything other than a 10-second diversion. I was going to bring up The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 as something that had like drawn a huge following and then has some like hardcore insane people who love it and some hardcore insane people who hate it. But I would say, like, I think Call of Duty, to me, in this, I can't stress this enough again, is nothing against the developers, but Call of Duty is like a Madden game. It comes out every year. The people who like it will buy it. If it has this like one of the more recent FIFA games, I think, had a really, really, really busted everything. And I'm like, okay, so people will still criticize that. Final Fantasy, I think, is more on par, but I think, like, a Call of Duty is what I would say is, like, on par with Pokemon, but I don't think the level of fandom... I don't think that...
Well,
the level of fandom is the same, even remotely.
It's the willingness to accept criticism, right? I think that's what I'm really getting at. That so I think feels unique with Pokemon is that you can go up and say like, I hated Modern Warfare 2, and people will, and which is of course one of the most popular ones, and
wait,
people
the new
will be
one
willing
or the
to.
new one?
I'm talking about like the old one,
the old
like
new
the OG.
One.
Oh yeah, I don't know. You can't do this to me. You're gonna make me confused because I don't follow this. But my point being is that like I think you can criticize. You can certainly criticize like sports games. Like people that like sports games won't care. They'll be like, yeah, I buy every Madden or FIFA or whatever, but they're not gonna like passionately go after you for not liking it. And I mean, obviously, some people will. And obviously, we are still talking about like a small group, right? And I feel like the only thing that can even make sense to it is what you referenced earlier, is that people just tie part of their identity to Pokemon. And so when you're criticizing Pokemon, you're criticizing part of that person. But even then it's confusing because people do the same thing with Star Wars. And there's plenty of games people will admit about Star Wars that are bad. And even movies.
This is we've done this. We've done this on the show. And then I will let us move on to the next brief section of the conversation. But I had a very similar conversation because Hogwarts Legacy just came out, and I currently work with a guy who is a huge Harry Potter fan. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I said something about, like, when I went to college, I had a couple other friends who absolutely destroyed me when they found out that I hadn't gone on to Pottermore to find out which house I was. And I said, there's a certain portion of the fandom that turned me off of the franchise before all the J.K. Rowling stuff. That's not this conversation. But like I said, there's a certain portion of the Harry Potter fandom that annoys me to an extraordinary degree just because of how intense they can be with it. Mm-hmm. You could tell as soon as I said that, and this is normally a guy who like holds his... And actually, he listens to the show, so he'll now know exactly which story I'm talking about once this episode gets published. But I said there's a certain portion of the fandom that just... they're so intense that they make me not want to engage even a little bit. And that's the level of fandom that we're bringing to Pokemon. So... There are certain people, and some people have actual rational reasons. I would say that my friend at work has a rational reason for still loving the thing that he loves. Yeah. I would say that there are certain Pokemon fans who have rational reasons for very much loving and identifying with Pokemon, and it's a part of their identity. They've got an Eevee backpack. It's a Pokemon reference. And you know, a million other different caveats, but like, he's usually a dude who's good at keeping things close to the vest. And like his whole face changed as soon as I said that, and he was like,
Making people upset at work, Aaron.
Yeah, no,
Causing
I mean,
a
that's
hostile work environment.
That's exactly what I do. But I imagine, before I bloviate for much too long, we should probably just touch on the last final thing.
Yeah, and that is actually even kind of ties into something that I had mentioned before with my story of getting this latest game, but it has to do with not only are Pokemon fans in the fandom particularly kind of apologetic for the companies that work on their games, but the Nintendo fandom in general tends to be a community that doesn't really hold the company accountable for the actions that they make. And I do want to make a clarification here. People don't really hold company. It's gotten better recently with people caring about developers and a lot of these issues, but historically it's been a weak area, I think, for a lot of places. But Nintendo, I think, is particularly bad. And it's really weird how anti-customer I feel like they are. We've even covered some of it here with like their mistreatment of contract workers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that Nintendo is more or less directly analogous to Disney, except for there's some different things. Like, Disney has done some kind of tokenizing work in terms of representation. They've done some really good work in terms of representation. And that'll make, you know, certain sections of the world very unhappy. Certain sections of the fandom very unhappy. But Nintendo gets away with an insane amount of garbage for being Nintendo. You know, like, they'll purposefully withhold products from retailers. Zach and I were recently talking about, this is to you, the listener. Zach and I were recently talking about the book Console Wars, where they covered the fact that when the Sega Genesis came out, there was this whole controversy, not controversy necessarily, but this whole issue with Nintendo actually threatening to withhold even more consoles during the SNES era if those retailers were going to stock the Genesis. And they'll still withhold amiibos. They won't give you a refund unless there's a huge outcry, and even then you have to jump through an insane number of hoops. And they'll never discount their games. And, I mean, you can go to a store and try and buy... What was the last Pokemon game, Zach? Sword and Shield?
Scarlet and Violet. Wait, do you mean the one... Oh, you're talking about the last one.
Yeah, the previous
Technically,
one.
it was like it was the remake of the... I don't even know what mid-gen
Well, I mean,
on.
let's put it this way. If you go to a store and try and buy a brand new copy of The Last of Us for PS3, it won't cost as much as The Last of Us 2 for PS4. Pokemon, you're going to be paying the exact same thing for a brand new copy for the rest of your life. So long as a store is willing to stock it, Nintendo's going to demand that they pay exactly the launch price.
Yeah.
They won't discount. And again, like I said, you told me a lot about the really rough refund process for Scarlet and Violet after there was a huge public outcrying, after which they originally said maybe or no.
To elaborate on that, I just think it's ridiculous that, so TLDR, you can get a refund apparently, or could get a refund for Scarlet and Violet, but you had to send an email to customer support with a bunch of account details through their website, as opposed to the Microsoft Store where it's just integrated, or Steam where it's just integrated into the storefront. I don't know about PlayStation. I haven't done PlayStation. So my whole, it's just the amount of effort on the consumer's part to refund a product, I just found to be like not particularly inviting. I think technically their policy is that you can't get refunds normally.
Yeah, I
On their
believe that.
online
I believe
store.
that's the case. But
Yeah.
the entire point there being that we have workplace issues in terms of mistreatment of contract workers. Again, check out our previous episodes. We've talked about this. We don't need to retread it. We've got anti-consumer sentiments on like 4 or 5 different levels, and yet I still paid them. I'm including myself in the problem. I still fucking paid them. I still bought the game. That's, you know, a thing, and there are still people that when I say, you know, I have problems with Pokemon games. There are some things that could be improved. I'll get really nasty glances, and that's just a fascinating dynamic to try and understand, and it's worth evaluating. And I don't want to speak for Zach, but I can say on a personal level that I have no answers for that, because it ain't just Nintendo. It's everywhere. It's when something is loved enough, you can use our system to manipulate the people who love the thing that you made. And maybe you're giving them exactly what they want. Maybe this game, for all of its technical flaws, is exactly what everyone wants. Maybe the 100,000th Marvel movie that has the exact same plot with a cutout version of the exact same character is exactly what everyone wants. Maybe Avatar 2, shooting straight down the middle, is exactly what everyone wants. But maybe it's not.
And I think the last thing, kind of on this quick Nintendo note, and we could definitely, I think, do an entire conversation on Nintendo, as we call it in our notes here, the golden child. We just kind of decided to tag it on because I think part of the reason that Pokemon gets a bit of a break is because it's considered a Nintendo property, so there's kind of the connection there. But I think the interesting thing is, Aaron, if I was to ask you, who is the least popular publisher among fans? Like if I was to say fuck a certain company, what would be the company that fall? Yeah. Okay. So funny thing about EA, right? And this is relevant. People, typically speaking, that I have talked to that work at EA have liked it a lot. People, generally speaking, from the employee perspective, seem to think that EA may be a little bit corporate. Yeah, there may be some meddling, but typically I hear very positive things about EA. And, you know, some of my bosses have previously worked there. I have some coworkers that previously worked there. I hear very positive things about EA from a actual like worker side. And then there's all these other companies that you hear, and it's like all their prestige and all of the positivity that company gets is entirely from the consumer side. And then when you look at the developers internally, a lot of the time it's like, yeah, we had to crunch a lot and it was kind of awful. And I just think that juxtaposition is interesting. Because it's like EA has had this historically really negative perception from consumers, but people typically are pretty happy working there. I mean, it may not be like the sexiest job, depending on what studio you're at, but like a lot of the time, the stories from people that I know at least tend to be more positive. And I just think that's like kind of interesting. Ultimately. I don't know. It's like reality versus perception, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's explicitly reality versus perception. And I think that just speaks to the power of marketing. And I think that's somewhere where Pokemon thrives. I think it's somewhere where Nintendo thrives. And I will give Nintendo credit. Their innovations in hardware, even though their hardware is always underpowered, who gives a fuck? They come up with creative ideas. Sony completely failed with the Vita and the PSP, even though I own both and I love both. Completely failed with those. But the Switch came out. Everyone went insane. And now I'm getting articles like, is 2023 or 2024 going to be the year where Sony releases a new handheld? The Steam Deck has done the exact same thing. Valve has had a terrible track record with hardware. They're about as bad as Google. It's nuts. It's the power of marketing. What is your association? Why are so many...
you know that... Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I'm just saying, like, you know, it's the power of marketing. What is your association? That's really all there was.
Well, yeah, and I think kind of my favorite thing that I would hate to leave out is just to illustrate this point. And this will be kind of my really last thing for the most part, is that when you're talking about the power of marketing, just remember that Game Freak sells you the same game twice as a bundle and tries to pretend that they're two different games when they're really not at all. And I think that's the craziest thing. They just got in so early with the fact that there's these two versions of Pokemon, and they're definitely different. It's like, okay, whatever, right? Okay.
There's one different Pokemon in there, and I'm like, okay, so who are you selling that to? Are you selling that to people with two kids? One of them who likes the color red and one of them who likes the color blue. I'm not speaking from experience at all, having played myself Pokemon Ruby and having my brother jointly play Sapphire. Or are you selling it to couples who want to play it together? Or are you just selling the same game twice and changing one thing?
To be fair, they changed a little bit more than one, but it's like, you know, cosmetic. Yeah,
it's an aesthetic change. And I'm like, at a certain point, is an aesthetic change worth $65?
It's like, you're an orange at your university in the game, and I'm a grape. Clearly very important differences.
It would be like if like Hogwarts Legacy was like, you can buy the Slytherin edition, and you had to buy each version of it, but the story didn't change much more.
Very much. Yeah.
You know, aesthetically. But regardless, I believe we are over time, and...
Well, I think our full ending salvo is really just... Why can a game that technically performs pretty not great and also does limited innovation over its like 27-year existence or whatever it is, it's basically the same age as us. That's crazy, the franchise. But anyway, how can it succeed? The answer is capitalism. Why aren't they innovating? Also capitalism. Until people really demand more from the franchise, or they decide that they care enough about innovation to restructure the way that they release the game, it's probably just not going to change very much, except in spin-off games. So I guess that's really where our hope is for Pokemon, if like there's going to be any big changes, is that, you know, Arceus and the future spin-offs just continue to be what we want. But it doesn't seem like the main lines are going to do that for us.
And I hate to take this stance. It's not a stance necessarily, but I will say there may be room. I don't know if it's 20 million copies since it came out room, but there may be room for the comfort food of video games, right? Like, how many times have you ordered your favorite pizza from your favorite pizza place? Your favorite meal from your favorite restaurant? Maybe there's room for that. But in the meantime, a pizza doesn't fucking cost $70. And you don't spend that much time eating a pizza. So I agree with everything you said there, Zach. I don't see Pokemon innovating very much recently. I'll probably end up needing to get Arceus, but I wish Nintendo would discount it, considering there's a new one.
Yeah.
Well, this is the world we live in.
C'est la vie.
C'est la vie.
Well, do you have anything else, or is it sign off time?
I believe it's time to go.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning into Some Patches Required. We've had a fantastic return with all of you. And as I said before, my name's Zach.
My name's Aaron, and I have some thank yous.
Oh, you have some thank yous.
Yeah, we got to thank Art.
Oh my goodness, you're right. I'm so out of the loop. You're so right.
We're shaking the rust off. I'm just going to do both of them
really
blast
are.
right through. We're going to thank Art for our fantastic album art. That would be Art on Twitter and wherever you can find other great pieces of art, as well as Beach Girl, the composer of our wonderful theme music, which you will have already heard and will soon hear again. And you can find them on Spotify, Bandcamp, and any place where good music lives, generally speaking. If you want, throw them some money for some of their stuff. It's good stuff.
Hell yeah. And remember, everybody, that according to my fine friend Chafello out of Belle Vernon, PA, the crunch of the Moa-flavored Pringle chip is the first thing you'll notice. Not only that, but the satisfying chew and the multi-layer flavor that assaults you like a brute with a cinder shot and doesn't let up. Remember that. And if you're curious, that's a dumb reference to the Moa-flavored chip from our Halo episode. I guess they're still selling these things.
I might have to try them out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in the meantime, Zach has already given himself a name, and my name has remained Aaron throughout the duration of the episode. And goodbye.
Goodbye.
Yeah. Hit us up on TripAdvisor,